Bell rings, about time to begin. Before we do, we'll just go around the room and on our sick folks. Got good news from the Oberts. Their two grand young'uns are home now, so it's in their care and custody 24 hours a day instead of having nurses around to help them. So it's good to see the Moody's back. Is Emma in class, or is she still?
She's at home. We're still waiting. We're on the last step of getting her medication approved, and then she's gonna have 3 infusions and then shots at home.
Okay. Waiting on approval to get some medicines and infusions for Emma. And Brian I noticed he wasn't here. Is he?
It sounds like the stomach virus, but he's pretty much over it, but now he's just real weak.
Brother Brian's got some kind of virus over it, real weak. Remember, Pansy's got her surgery the 3rd of April. Brother Terry has been on the puny side. I don't know. I didn't talk to him today, but yesterday he was still sounding kind of hoarse and croaky. He had come down with something pretty rough this past week.
I like to express for Sarah Miles. My mother, she had a fall the other day. She's doing well, but I was like for you to pray. Continue prayers.
Okay, Susie's mother had fallen.
Yes, and also for me, for strength and God.
Okay. Haven't heard any updates on Beth Booth's brother. Has anybody know anything about that? He was real serious. Okay.
I feel like there was an email sent out a day or two ago. I don't remember what it said.
Well, the last email that I got on it was that he was in the hospital. He had COVID, but they knew he had something else. Couldn't figure it out. So, anything else before we begin our class?
I would like to put my son-in-law, Mike Kane, and he works within Church of the Lord's Way. He's had 3 surgeries on one eye, and it's much more serious than cataracts. I can't describe it, but he's in need of some help.
Okay.
Not financially, I mean,
Just prayers. Okay.
talk to God.
Okay.
And my daughter-in-law's grandfather passed away after several years of strokes. Their funeral's Monday, 11 o'clock at First Baptist in Prattville.
Okay. Brother Bobby, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Father God, we thank you for this time we have to come together to study thy word. Pray for those who have been mentioned here. Pray for the speaker of the hour. We ask to put your company hands on them all. Give them a measure of comfort as they will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Today is the day for review. Next week we start a new series, and I make the standing offer. Anybody that wants to teach this class, you're welcome to it. Just let me know so we'll have you one at a time instead of all trying to teach on the same day. But on the review here, we start with Judges chapter 16. Judges chapter 16. On our last review, we had covered the judges up to Samson being, I guess you could say, incarcerated. He had been captured, had his hair cut off, eyes put out and everything, and now we're getting to his, this is starting with putting his eyes out and then his demise. So let's just start with verse 23, where it says, the lords of the Philistines had gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice. And they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. Now, we made it a point when we talked about this roughly 6 weeks ago. I hope you remember, because I'm going to ask you the questions. Who caused Samson to be captured? Who caused Samson to lose his strength? Samson. So when they say, our God has delivered him, did their God have anything to do with Samson's capture? No. And Dagon was their national god, and we had described a little bit about him. What kind of figure was he? Fish man, part fish, part man. And then it goes down again and says, our God has delivered him into our hand. And then when it goes down that they had called him to perform, I guess to put on a show, he performed for them, and then he stationed himself between the two pillars, and we went into a good explanation of that, and Brother Jeremy, with his engineering background, talked a little bit about the structure. And then we talked about the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof watching while Samson performed. So if you've got that many on the roof, you've got at least half that many under the roof in the room, but watching what's going on. And then Samson called out to the Lord, remember me, I pray, strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And he took hold of the pillars, pushed them over, and then all those people died. And it said that he killed more on that one occasion than he had killed his previous 20 years as a judge. Questions or comments then on chapter 16? Okay, moving into chapter 17. No, never mind. That's not where the book went last time. We went from 16 to Ruth, the book of Ruth. Who can tell me give me a synoptic view of the book of Ruth? Okay, we'll do it the hard way. Who was Ruth? Pardon? She was a Moabite. What?
I thought she said woman. I can't hear very well.
Well, that's why I'm saying, huh? What? Because my hearing's not what it used to be either. Okay, she was a Moabite woman. So what's the book of Ruth all about? I thought the Bible was talking about, the Old Testament talking about the Jews. So where does Ruth come in? A Moabite. She was a daughter-in-law to a Jew. What else?
She was faithful to her mother-in-law.
Faithful to her mother-in-law. Boy, it's like picking hen's teeth. Sorry? Basically, she was a proselyte. And why do you say that?
Because she worshipped her mother-in-law's God, which is God.
She made that proclamation that she would worship the same way, live the same way, die the same way, be buried the same way, do everything.
It's a lot more complicated, obviously, throughout the book, but the general idea is that they were in a place without God and without blessing, and came to a place with God and got great blessing. We see, it starts with they all lose their husbands, they have no children. There's no hope for them as far as their family line, and yet we see God, through their obedience and through their faithfulness, bless them with a great family line, and a husband and a child, and so many things that they were lacking when they were in that land away from God.
Last week, I think it was Terry's class that we was covering, we mentioned Rahab, or sometime along the way we'd mentioned Rahab the harlot. how that if she had not completely obeyed, even to the point of putting a piece of red thread out the window, that her family would have been not saved. But by her being completely obedient, she then married Salmon, and what became of that marriage?
Their child Boaz, who was the only one willing to redeem Ruth.
They had Boaz, who was was the one family member that was willing and able to redeem Ruth and Naomi's property and Ruth. And then what did that do with Ruth? So Rahab the harlot marries Salmon, who has Boaz. Boaz marries Ruth, and then who is their great grandson? King David. So I find it kind of amazing how God puts all that together and makes it all work. What else do we know about Ruth? What does Boaz say about Ruth? Why was Boaz so kind to her? She was industrious, a hard worker, and also it's already been mentioned that she honored Naomi, but here she goes out and gleans the field so they can have food, and Boaz takes care of the situation. There's also another point to be made. Pardon? Relation. He had a responsibility to do that. But what else does he say about her that puts her in a very favorable light? What about the age difference between the two? Doesn't Boaz commend her for not going out and hanging around with the younger men, but was willing to be with him, marry him, and that was to perpetuate the ancestral line the way that the Jews were supposed to do it? Anything else about Naomi, Ruth, Boaz?
As a side note, you look at Naomi, right? We don't often talk about her as much, but obviously she was a godly woman because of the influence that she had on Ruth. So she's to be commended there, but you look at her attitude shift, not necessarily in a bad way, but in a not pleasant way. After all of this happens to her, she is worn down and quits. There's a lesson on that side too. If we can find ourselves in a similar spot.
In essence, how many times does her attitude shift? She's married, she's got family, everything's good to go, and then when her sons die, what's her attitude? Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Then when Ruth marries a family member and has a child, what's her attitude now? She's back into the full bloom, so to speak. Anything else on the book of Ruth? We shall spend the rest of the time on the book of Samuel. 3 chapters of Samuel. We just covered those in the past 3 weeks. What is the book of 1 Samuel about in general?
Being called by God.
Okay? That's part of it, and that's what we'll be looking at today. But if you look at the whole book of Samuel, what's the whole book entail?
Really the transition from the judges to the kings.
Transitioning from judges into kings. Let's just go back and start with chapter 1 then. We spent quite a bit of time on this last 2 or 3 weeks ago. It says, Elkanah from the land of Ramathaim Zophan, mountains of Ephraim, that's verse 1. Verse 2 says, he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, we had discussed this just a little bit. Where else do we find the name Peninnah in Scripture? It's a trick question. We don't. This is the only reference to her. Where else do we find Hannah in Scripture? Trick question. We don't.
When she poured out her heart to God for a child.
Well, this, yeah, but what I'm saying is Hannah is only mentioned in this section of the Bible. We don't find any other reference to her. She's referenced about 8 times, I think, in this book, and Peninnah is the name is spoken twice, but she's referred to it another time also. But when it comes down to it, they went yearly to Shiloh to offer sacrifices. And who's at Shiloh? What priest is at Shiloh at this time? And who are his 2 sons that are of no good? Hophni and Phinehas. Verse 5 of this says, when Hannah, but he gave to Hannah a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. When they went to offer, he gave Peninnah her share, but he gave Hannah a bigger portion. How do you think that made Peninnah feel? If we go back to other cases in Scripture where sisters are involved, or husband or 2 women are involved, how does one feel versus the other when one is favored over the other? A little bit of jealousy. If we go all the way back to Abraham, how did draw in the blank, know the name, draw in the blank, help me out. Huh? Hagar. How did Hagar and Sarah get along?
Great until she bore a child for Abraham.
Great until as long as she was just the servant of Sarah, but as soon as Sarah told Abraham to take her for a wife and give me a child by her, as soon as she knew she was pregnant, things went the opposite direction. So,
Almost like God never intended for there to be more than 2 people.
and that is quite true. And I don't understand today how there are so many. There are still multiple marriages in certain parts of the United States, the religious world. Not supposed to be, but there are. I don't understand how they can do all that. But anyway, so I said she was referred to in other places, but not spoken by name. Verse 6 is talking about Hannah and says, her rival provoked her severely. Again, this reminds me of Hagar, because what was Hagar doing with Sarah? And as Brother Bert said then, and when we get down to verse 8, starting with that, she's weeping bitterly, and then as we go on along, as she was in bitterness of prayer, verse 10, and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish, then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. So here she was praying for that child, and in essence she was making a Nazirite vow for him and was going to give him to the Lord his whole life. And verse 13, as Hannah spoke in her heart, but moved her lips, her voice was not heard, therefore Eli thought she was drunk. Can you envision any of that going on, that she's there praying silently? Have you ever been around anybody that reads, but they read to themselves, but they move their mouth? Similar situation here. She's praying, she's talking silently, but she's moving her mouth. A little bit different situation today. What bothers me is I'll be in a store or I'll be somewhere and somebody will say something and I'll turn around to respond to them, and then I see them with a thing in their ear, they're talking on the cell phone. Does that bother you? If they're going to have a conversation, they need to go have a conversation, not in the middle of things.
I wonder if this was such an abnormal thing to Eli. I mean, it makes total sense to me that he thought she was under the influence or something, because I've been dealing with people who are under the influence of something. I've seen this sort of behavior, somebody who, like you said, is their mouth's moving, nothing's coming out, or something of that nature. But I wonder why he went there first, why that was his immediate assumption. You would think that he has seen her at least yearly for quite a while. But I, again, don't know how much volume of people came through that area.
Well, you also have to look at it was their general custom that they would eat and drink and be merry, and so he might have thought that she had just had a little too much. I mean, apparently he did, because that's how he addresses the issue.
Honestly, I wonder if it's a simpler answer. We know his sons had already perverted all of the things that are going on in the temple. All of this is probably commonplace, given what we're told about them a little bit later. I think he probably was around it enough that he was just done with it. And he's like, it's another one, get out.
So you think he was surprised when she talked to him?
I do.
And seems to be, because his response to her was what? And then he prayed for her.
She's actually here doing what a faithful Israelite ought to be doing, not what I thought she was. Which is a sad commentary on where things were.
So they went back home, and she conceived and bore a son, named him Samuel. Then she didn't go back up to Shiloh for a few years until the child was weaned. And at what age did we say the child was probably weaned? Pardon? 3 or 4 years old. That was their custom. I don't know if Andrew recalls this or not, but when we was in the Philippines back in 1972, 3 and 4, it was not uncommon, and I'll phrase this as gently as I can, but it was not uncommon for a child playing in the yard, look 5 or 6 years old, to go up to mama and get a drink. I'll leave it at that. So different cultures have different customs. Get down to chapter 2. Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord." And we had paused a little bit there and talked about when the word horn was used in Scripture, it generally means a position of authority or power or statue or something like that. And she goes from being bitter and in anguish to rejoicing because she now had a child. She smiles at her enemies, talks about the Lord, and goes on down through verse 10 in that poem or that song. Questions or comments through that point? There is one thing I wanted to go back and cover. If we go back to chapter 1 and verse 16, we had discussed this: do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman. King James and others use the word servant of Baal or Belial, which was basically not a person but a personification of evil. So back to chapter 2, down to verse 11. Then Elkanah went to his house at Ramah, but the child ministered to the Lord before Eli and the priest. The child here what age would the child be at this point? Or what time period does the word child cover back in those days?
There were at least 12 given Jesus' account of Luke.
If you go to that, so it's technically anywhere from the infant stage to the adolescent stage, which if it's getting into the later stages here and trying to compare it to Luke and Christ, we're looking at just preteen. Now the sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. How were they corrupt?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Yes?
In just about every way possible.
About every way possible. When it says they did not know the Lord, what does that take into account? If they're evil in just about any way possible, what was God's command on how they should do the sacrifices? If we go back into Exodus, Leviticus, and look at that, what was the procedure? It was the burnt offering first, and then they got their portion. The priest. How does how does Hophni and Phinehas, how do they do it?
They take the choicest cuts first.
They take what they want and how much they want first. So they have flipped the role. It's not God first, it's them first. So they disrespect God in that way.
There's a lesson there for us too. You look at the differences between the way it's supposed to be done and the way it was done. How often do we today do the same thing with our life? Instead of giving God what He asked for first, we take what we're interested in, what we think is important, and do what we want to first.
That is an excellent point, and I think the one place that would drive that point home better than any other is when it comes to the offering. How are we supposed to give to God? Freely?
From our first fruits.
Willingly? Purposefully? Pardon? And according to how we've been blessed, we're supposed to sit down and think it out and give back proportionately, willfully, cheerfully and all those other things. But what happens a lot of times, getting back to your point, what happens a lot of times when people give to the Lord? There, I'm sure if any of you have waited on the table, y'all have seen it done. You start going around with the plates, and it's like an afterthought. People will reach and look and see what they've got left or what they think they can portion out at that time. There was no plan involved. And I think that's, at least to me, that's the one that comes to mind that would be the most prevalent there.
I think that's just a symptom of the problem that Jared is talking about. You know, that along with poor attendance of worship services, I think is a symptom rather than a problem. It's definitely a problem because God commands for those things to be done, but it shows a problem in our lives with prioritizing God altogether, because God does call for us to offer, you know, to give in the offering and to do those things first. God does call for us to be at worship, but he also calls for us to give him the first fruit of every part of our life, to prioritize him every day and in every moment and in every decision that we make, not just those visible actions or items that we see here. And yes, we've kind of, I think any of us men that have been up and doing that have seen that kind of afterthought behavior. And we've all, I guess, probably fallen victim to forgetting or not getting our check written out quick enough or whatever it may be. But again, I think we struggle so often outside of this room, this building, in giving God the first fruit of our life when it comes to what am I doing today for God? Is today about me or is it about him?
We've all had conversations with fellow Christians when they get a promotion or they're going to move somewhere for a new job or whatever, and you ask them, well, you know, have you found a church there? Or, you know, if they take a new position that requires them to work on Sunday, how's that going to affect the worship? And a lot of times they don't think about it.
That's a good point there, because don't know for absolute certainty, but I'm almost sure that David Howard and his family did it like we did when we moved to a new location, because I was working most of the time. Andrew would make the phone calls, but when we moved to a new location, before the next service time, she had some and had talked to people and knew where we needed to go, or thought we needed to go. We had to change that a time or two, but we would check that out. And as you say, a lot of people make no plan. They just decide they're going to show up. Now, I'm going to put the exception in before I ask you the question. Except during times when you are sick, when you don't feel good. I'm not talking about just, I'm talking about sick, all right? How many of you get up on Sunday morning, Sunday evening, or Wednesday night and have to decide at that point whether or not you're going to church or going to assembly? From the day I became a Christian, it was just, that's where we belong. No debate, no decision, just that takes place. And that's why I put the exclusion in first, because I have gotten up on Sunday mornings and debated a little while and then tell Andrew, I'm just not going to make it. But that's the exception to the rule. Any other time, if I'm not feeling so poorly I can't come, there's no debate. What do you think about these congregations of churches that change their worship service to accommodate something going on in the world, like Christmas, Super Bowl? What do you think about that?
You're talking about the day of worship or the time of meeting?
Both?
Yes.
wrong and one is dangerous.
Which is dangerous.
Dangerous is changing your schedule, your hourly schedule for the day. It's not in the scriptures, it doesn't tell us when you're supposed to meet, just that you are. So if you decide to change it for an event, that is a decision for the eldership, where there is no eldership within the congregation. But it should be approached with care and forethought, as with every decision.
Well, my opinion is it's wrong and not dangerous.
I'm sorry?
I said, my opinion is it's wrong and not dangerous for this reason. Who are you putting first? Hmm?
Our own desire to be part of something that's not.
Aren't we putting ourselves before we?
Point, and I'm not arguing that you should make that call, but the question remains, anytime you set a schedule of anything, you take people's availability into account.
Absolutely. I know congregations that have their, quote, Wednesday night Bible study on Tuesday nights. Not a thing wrong with that, because they're accommodating the people's need and their meeting. Is the people's need to go see a Super Bowl? To change the schedule, huh?
I'll never answer yes to that. That's a personal choice. But now it's, like I said, it's a dangerous question. Or, I suppose, careful might be a better word. But
Now, see, we've changed time schedules here on for various reasons, but it was generally for safety or something of that nature. If we saw the weather was going to be bad, if the snow is going to get here and start snowing at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we moved it up and had an earlier service.
Larry, I think going back to your original point, if you love something, you want to give everything to it, whether it's financially, your presence, the work that you do. It should be a thought of, if you're talking financially, there comes to a point where, okay, I'm probably getting to a point where I need to rein that back in a little bit, because he's also asked me to be a good steward of my household and to provide for my family and things of that nature. But I want to give everything I can to him. Same for the work that we do. At some point, I'm not going to say there's too much, but that should be the thought. How much I need to draw that back, some, because I have other obligations that God has asked me to do too. Your presence, I want to be here every single time. So the question should be, maybe I shouldn't go because I am too sick, but I want to go, instead of, well, I feel a little bad, I probably should stay home. I don't know if I'm saying that very well, but somebody should be saying, you're probably too sick to come, not, I'm too.
Well, the issue with that is, years ago, things were different. People would be around people, they'd go to work sick with a cold, the flu, they'd go to work. If they could possibly drag themselves in, they was going to be there. But now, because of all the hypervigilance, and I'm using those terms for a specific reason, hypervigilance, because the medical community and all the others, stay away, don't contaminate others. I might feel really bad and want to be at attendance, but how is everybody going to feel if I come in there sneezing and wheezing?
So I apparently didn't explain it very well.
Uh-oh.
But what I'm saying is, your desire should be here in
you should be drawing, it should be where are you going to Walmart that night? Are you going to work the next day still feeling the same way? That's kind of,
Yeah.
It gets frustrating for me and discouraging me when I see someone that, well, I miss services, but yesterday you were out at the park with, and you got pictures posted all over Facebook, and, then Monday you're going to work just fine, but that's discouraging,
Which,
It sounds to me like David is saying that our love for the people that we're coming to be near should trump our desire to be here to worship, rather than it be, I'm sick so I have an excuse to stay home, right? But everything we're saying has the same basic background. Like we talked with Daniel, I have purposed in my heart. That decision has already been made to serve and to prioritize God. And whatever runs into that decision, whether it's sickness or whether it's death or whatever it may be, or emergency or weather or whatever, that those things come as a burden to us rather than as a burden to God. That we should feel a supreme disappointment and upsetness because we're not able to be where we desire to be in that situation.
And it's changing one letter. I've got to go to services versus I get to go to services. That type of thing as well.
I'm going to throw one in here, and I'm going to get rocks thrown at me, but that's okay. Because some of the people today, I feel a little bad. I don't want to spread this around, but I'm not missing service. I'm watching it on live stream. Is live stream a crutch in a lot of situations when it should not be? Should not your focus be assembly and not observance?
Larry, that says that we should edify one another with our presence. So are you able to edify online?
I can't edify anybody from my house watching it on live stream. Now I can be edified, but that's not where you're going with that. Live stream to me has a positive and a negative. I know for a fact Brother Bryant is sick today or he would be here. I hope he felt well enough to watch us on live stream, and that is great because he has an opportunity to be with us in that manner. But on the other hand, there's too many people, I think, that use excuses and use the live stream as the crutch that I'm assembling with the folks, but they're not here present. They need to be here. So I have sort of a love-hate relationship with live stream.
Two comments. I'll do the easy one first. By definition, you cannot assemble if you are not together with the people you are assembling with. It is impossible. And that is the end of that discussion.
Mm.
It serves a purpose, and I'm glad that it is available when it's needed, but it is not a substitute for worship. That being said, all of this that we've already talked about was addressed in Paul's letter. I'm going to get it wrong now because I'm talking. When he talked to the Bereans or the Thessalonians, they first gave themselves, and then they gave everything else. They gave themselves to God, and then everything else was in the proper priority. Once we are where we need to be with God, everything else will fall into place.
I go back to Ezra 7:10. That's my favorite one.
Excuse me.
He first purposed in his heart. He's out to count and ring the bell, but I tell you a personal story that's happened to me on a couple of occasions. I have gotten up on a Sunday morning, supposed to teach the class here. I have gotten up on Sunday mornings, and after my shower, I called Andrea and said, call 911. I was on my way to the emergency room. While she was calling 911, I was also giving her some other instructions, and you know what that was? call so-and-so and have them take my place? Where was my heart and mind? I knew I was sick. I knew I had to go to the hospital. I knew I was on my way to the emergency room. But what was I thinking about first? Taking care of business here. And that's happened on a couple of occasions. So we got a little off subject today, but I think it was all good discussion. Thank y'all so much. Next week we'll start a new study.